Hope you guys are having a good day. Hope you're having a good Friday, my good friends. I do bid you a good day. Beats the alternative, right? You know, so it's 2:41 Pacific time, so 5:41 Eastern time, Central 4:41. I'm wondering how many people are actually still working right now. Spring break starts for a lot of kids today, which, interestingly, they're saying this is spring break. My ass, it's Good Friday. They're just disguising this as spring break. Spring break starts on Monday. It's all about the chocolate rabbits until Monday, guys. It's all about the chocolate rabbits. But I wonder who's still working. If you are out there, let me know what's going on, who you are, where you're at. My name's Brian Stevens. We're going to talk about a couple of things of interest today. Maybe, depending on how long I can hold out here, as we've got a handful of gremlins in the office today. So we'll see. But we've got some great information that we're going to talk about here. By the way, as I said before, my good friends over at Oak Tree are here to help you out with all your non-QM stuff. They're absolutely fantastic to work with. All right, so let's get into the gist of what we're going to talk about today, and this is actually fairly interesting. So, HUD put out the federal government put out an executive order, the current administration, an executive order called 13985, otherwise known as the Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities Through the Federal Government Act. That's what they just released. It is worth pointing out, too, that leading up to the last presidential election, there was a lot of talk on both sides about what we were going to do to fix kind of our housing situation that we have. And by the way, it does need to be fixed. Okay, it just does need to be fixed. We got a problem. Nobody can afford shit right now. And then after the election, we haven't heard really anything of consequence, nothing really substantial about housing. Now that we have our midterms that are going to take place in 6 months, we're starting to hear both sides coming up, so they can jump on their bully pulpit and talk about housing and what they're going to do. So right on cue, ignoring housing for the past 18 months, the executive branch comes out and says, we've got an order 13985, and it's going to be called Advancing Racial Equity and Support for Underserved Communities through the Federal Government Act. So what happened is HUD put together an action plan. Okay, once HUD realized that the federal government said this is what we're going to do, well, how are we going to do it? We're going to take one arm of the federal government, that being HUD, with Marcia Fudge being the director of HUD, the presidential appointed director of HUD, and they came out and said, okay, the U.S. Department of Housing is going to come out and we're going to issue its Equity Action Plan. The Equity Action Plan is in result to the Executive Order 13985. Okay. And by the way, we like all this stuff. Racial equity, love it. It's great. That's what we want. We want to advance racial equity. We want everyone to live an equitable life. Perfect sense. Supporting underserved communities, love it. It's a great idea. We should be doing this. This is the charter. This is the mandate of the Housing and Urban Development HUD. Through the federal government, not necessarily a very great track record now, do they? Did you know, as I said before, that amongst African Americans, we had a higher home ownership rate during Jim Crow laws than we currently have now? There are a lower percentage of African Americans who own houses now than we did during the times of Jim Crow. So if HUD has been around since the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2s, 10s, 2s, 20, 70 years, and they are trying to advance racial equity, they've done a really bad job. You just can't ignore the results. All the bullshit they try, it seemingly doesn't work, because ownership levels right now amongst minority classes, specifically African Americans, is lower now than it's ever been. However, HUD's at it again. Now, I find this interesting because what we learned before is that what we learned before was that HUD actually got a higher budget. Okay, so they had a budget that was it was right at $60 billion, and so they got a 19% increase, or an $11 billion increase to HUD's budget. HUD is now up to $71 billion to operate. So with a $60 billion budget that they had last year, and being around trying to serve underserved communities and trying to serve communities of color to shorten the equity gap between minority classes and essentially white America, we've seen that divide actually increase. You have an agency around for 70 years and a budget of $60 billion, and you've gone in the wrong direction for 70 years. What is the solution from the federal government? To give them $11 billion more dollars. I'm just saying, if you're going to fail miserably with whatever your mandate is, fail miserably with less money, not with more money. I would rather HUD fail with $60 billion than $71 billion. Nevertheless, that's where we're at right now. So HUD gets an increase. The federal government comes out and says, we are going to do things that allows the president to get on his bully pulpit, and all the senators and House members who are vying for re-election to get on their bully pulpit and say, see what our party did. We have increased the budget of HUD. We are actively going and trying to narrow the equity gap amongst folks of different racial classes, or different ethnicities and different socioeconomic backgrounds. We are going to try to shrink that gap. With a very piss poor history of doing any of this, HUD jumps on board, and they come out and say, aha, we are going to actually do it this time. Now they're armed with a bigger budget. They're armed with a presidential mandate. So HUD's going to come out and fix everything. So here's what I want to ask you. It's like, what's HUD going to do? All right, well, I can tell you what HUD's going to do because they outlined it. Now, with a budget of $71 billion, with 19% more, an additional $11 billion. So $71 billion. What's HUD going to do? Check this out. The first thing HUD's going to do with their new action plan is they're going to take they want FHA activities to maximize home ownership creditworthiness for first-time home buyers. Okay. So they want the FHA to maximize home ownership for creditworthiness, for creditworthy first-time home buyers. How are they going to do that? Seriously, how are they going to do that? All right. The FHA is going to activities. So they want the FHA to engage in activities that would maximize home ownership for creditworthy first-time homebuyers. They already go down to a 580 credit score, though lenders really don't write to a 580 credit score. Lenders are the ones who put on, by the way, their loan level price adjustments. I don't know if you guys knew that or not, but when you look at Ginnie loans, they don't have any loan level price adjustments, meaning if you have a 580 credit score, a 780 credit score, and you're getting an FHA loan, raw pricing is the same. That's not the case with your agency Fannie and Freddie loans, but with Ginnie, your FHA, your USDA, and your VA loans, there are no loan level price adjustments whatsoever. There's really nothing they can do there, but there's activities, you see, to maximize home ownership. I don't understand what the activities could be to maximize home ownership. Now, I guess I'm going to presume they could go out there and get some commercials. They can buy some ad space. They can promote first-time homebuyer seminars. They could promote responsible spending. They could do all of this type of stuff. But here's the effing kicker. First-time homebuyers amongst low to moderate income individuals and families can't buy homes right now. Period. They can't afford them. With a median sales price across the country at $368,000, I got news for you. Your low to moderate income first-time homebuyer cannot afford to buy a house, period. So FHA, they can be as active and kinetic as they want to be. They can certainly go ahead and do it. They can put their pom-poms in short skirts and they can cheerlead all they want. They can talk about, budgeting, credit repair. They can talk about whatever they want, but when it comes down to it, the brass taxes, when the rubber meets the road, low to moderate income people can't buy houses in this country anymore. Middle income America can't buy houses anymore. Upper middle class can't buy houses anymore. Entry-level homes aren't being built anymore. We know this. So this is really an activity that is chasing one's tail more than anything, because there's not an activity that the FHA can engage in to maximize home ownership for creditworthy first-time homebuyers. Not to mention the fact that, oh, by the way, you're just thinking of this shit right now, HUD? Haven't you had the same mandate for the past 70 years? Why is maximizing home ownership for creditworthy first-time homebuyers something that should get us as being a new idea? We have this new mandate. Oh my God, we are going to put out our points, and this is what we're going to start doing. You're going to start helping first-time home. I mean, isn't this just business as usual? Shouldn't this just be business as usual? Why is it part of this new action plan? I thought this was always the case. If this wasn't always the case, then what has HUD been doing? But the fact of the matter is, this shows that HUD is working in a very antiquated, analog mindset. They are not in touch with what's going on with the United States housing market right now. If they think with their new action plan over there at HUD that FHA being active to maximize home ownership amongst creditworthy first-time homebuyers has any meat on the bones. It doesn't. First-time homebuyers cannot buy homes. They simply can't afford them. Those homes don't exist. As I said before, you could look at any year in the 1970s, any year in the 1980s. We in the United States were building on average amongst a smaller U.S. population than we currently have right now, any given year, 450,000 entry-level homes. In the 2000s, or the 2010s and on, we're building 40,000 per year. We're down 200,000 houses per year of entry-level affordable housing. They're houses that just aren't getting built right now. The entry-level home is a 5-bedroom, 4-bathroom, 3,600 square foot McMansion that's going for $500,000. That's not an entry-level home, but that's what's being built. So what happened is HUD has went out there and they diagnosed the problem. They diagnosed the problem. Hey, it kind of looks like you got a broken arm. I know what we need to do. Amputate your leg. I mean, the remedy for the problem here doesn't make sense, guys. This is what they just came. This is their brand new, just came out action plan to support the administration's first delve into housing since the election. All right, the second point. Increase engagement with non-traditional lenders, including community-based lenders, to better reach underserved communities. All right, so here's something that's pretty interesting and frankly a tad bit slippery. Okay, increase engagement with non-traditional lenders. So you're thinking non-traditional, non-QM? No, that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about community reinvestment funds type of money that trickles into communities all across the country. And yes, this could be very, very expensive. But when you look at community-based institutions, what we're talking about is finding loans that are neither Fannie, neither Freddie, or Ginnie. Now, this is the reason why, because once you get outside of the GSEs, the quasi-public-private GSEs, as they're supposed to be, once they get released from conservatorship, and you get away from the government agency loan, your FHA loan, that's pretty, and everything outside of that is non-traditional. But when we look at community-based lending, ask yourself, where does this money come from? It comes from the federal government. Where from the federal government? Oftentimes from HUD. So HUD is the one who's funding community-based institutions. So are they going to increase community-based lending? Which, by the way, I'm all for. I think it's a great idea, because the loans as they stand right now with the underwriting guidelines, with credit scores and looking at historic norms for credit scores amongst folks of different ethnic backgrounds, which are higher and lower, you could make an argument that underwriting guidelines are prejudicial in nature. They are based on historic averages of credit scores. So yeah, you're going to find fewer African Americans, fewer Hispanic Americans who are going to qualify for your Fannie, Freddie, Ginnie loans based on the credit scoring models that we currently have. So you would have to get away from that, and community-based institutions might not be a bad idea, a bad way to go. But just understand what I think HUD is talking about here is fully funding a completely different vertical of loans specifically intended for minority classes. And again, I'm okay with that. But rather than beating around the bush, why don't we just say that? Why don't we just say, why don't we either change the underwriting guidelines as they stand right now with the institutionalized lending options that we have on the table with Fannie, Freddie, and Ginnie? Why don't we just do that? But the other option is to create a completely and new subset of non-traditional community-based mortgages through community-based institutions and start offering lending this way. Here's my only concern about this. One, it costs an enormous amount of tax money. Two, how I've seen these happen in the past is what they end up doing is they allow debt-to-income ratios to exceed the norms that are acceptable under traditional mortgage lending underwriting guidelines. In other words, they'll take the low and moderate income folks who are buying houses that are more expensive than they can afford, because houses are more expensive than any entry-level person can afford who's on the lower ends of the socioeconomic rungs of our scale, and they allow them to qualify at higher debt-to-income ratios. Well, somebody who makes less money has less disposable money after their housing expense is paid. If I make $500,000 a year and I have a $3,000 mortgage, I have a shit ton of money left over, even if my back-end ratio is 70, don't I? I have a ton of disposable money to fix my car, for deferred maintenance, in case I get sick, to buy food, clothes, and all that type of stuff. But if I make $30,000 a year and I have a 55 back-end ratio, I don't have any disposable money. I can't even take care of the house that I just bought. So a lot of these community-based institutions would allow underwriting guidelines to be much more aggressive for the people who can least afford to have aggressive underwriting guidelines. That would be my biggest concern here. But again, it's not addressing what the core problem is. The core problem isn't the loans that we have on the books right now. The core problem is that entry-level folks can't buy homes right now. Low to moderate income people can't buy homes. And once again, this misses the mark because it doesn't address the problem. The third point is to ensure manufactured housing is a thriving source of affordable, quality, durable, and safe housing for Americans, including implementing up-to-date manufactured housing construction and safety standards. Okay, again, this doesn't cost any money either. This is a policy change, okay? This doesn't cost any money. This is a policy and enforcement issue for HUD. What HUD needs to do, what the federal government needs to do here, is they need to lower taxes for manufactured housing. They need to get rid of a ton of the regulation and junk a lot of the permits. Make it cheaper and easier for privately run manufactured housing companies to go ahead and build manufactured housing. And guess what? They'll do it. They'll do it. And while we're on the topic, why is this just coming up as a topic of conversation? You've had 70 years and $71 billion to sit around and figure out this shit. I can't believe this is just coming to you. Like, me with a couple of friends and a $35 bar bill could come up with better solutions for this crap than their $71 billion that they've got over there. This is absolutely insane that they're coming up with this just right now in their most recent action plan. This one was a layup, no-brainer, obvious slam dunk over a decade ago. And it's just coming up for conversation. And here's the funny thing. They want it to be, they're saying, we want to ensure that everything is affordable. All right, we like affordable. We like durable. By the way, manufactured housing is built to be durable. It has to be moved. Manufactured housing is built with 2x6s, not 2x4s. It's going to be safe. There's tons of guidelines and code that takes place. Not to mention lawsuits if it's not built up to the existing code. But what concerns me is when they say, we want to make sure that it's implementing up-to-date manufactured housing construction and safety standards. That tells me that they're missing the mark here, that they're not going to get away from regulation. They're going to push towards more regulation. That's what that screams at me. But again, this doesn't cost money, and this is something that HUD should have come up with decades ago. I'll burn through these here. Improving asset and credit building for renters interested in transitioning to homeowners. Improving assets. How do I improve your assets? How do I do it? Like, it's not my position. It's not my job to improve your assets. I don't even know what that means. I mean, I guess I give you things. How does the federal government improve a person's asset situation? Give them expensive shit. and credit building. Again, ask yourself, if there was a concert that was playing at your local civic center and your friend says, hey, do you want to go to the concert? And you're like, I don't know. How much do the tickets cost? They're $80,000 a ticket. No, I don't want to go. Why not? I can't afford to pay $80,000 for a ticket. Do you even care who's playing at the concert if you can't afford the price of admission? Do you? Oh, an $80,000 concert. Yeah, I ain't going. Why not? Because I can't afford it. I'm not Elon Musk. Can't afford that stuff. So you're going to increase assets. You're going to help them build credit for renters. Again, all of this is the charter, the mandate of HUD, which is to serve the underserved and to serve the low to moderate income folks. And this is also the mandate from what President Biden said. Remember at the very beginning of this live when President Biden said, we want to advance racial equity and support underserved communities. So remember, that's what this is for, to serve underserved communities and racial equity. Improve assets and credit building for renters interested in transitioning to home ownership. Who President Biden just described isn't buying a house. There's no houses to buy. There's no houses in the price range to buy. This is so out of touch with reality. It's just, I mean, this is like, oh, well, now it's starting to make sense why HUD has failed for 70 years to advance what their mission statement is. It's kind of making sense now because they're completely and totally out of touch with reality. They're just interested in talking points to get our elected officials reelected. And the last one is, and again, that one doesn't cost any money either, does it? And this one, what about this one right here? They're proposing a 40-year term for a loan modification on people who already don't make their house payments. Perfect. Perfect. All right, so somebody who's in a 30-year loan who's not making their house payment now gets a 40-year loan. They get 10 more years to screw this thing up. If you're not making your 30-year fixed-rate mortgage, you ain't paying your 40-year fixed-rate mortgage. Here's the interesting part of this. Think about this, guys. Think about this for a minute here, okay? So what did everybody just do over the last 2 years who owned a house and made their mortgage payments on time? They refinanced. They went from 5s to 3s and 4s to 2.5s and shit like that's what they did. They refinanced, didn't they? So a modification is a refinance for somebody who could never get a refinance. A modification is just a refinance, isn't it? Of sorts. But everybody who's getting a modification, guess what? Would get declined for a refinance. Every person right now getting a loan modification would be declined for every refinance ever. Ever. Nobody in a modification would ever get a refinance because they wouldn't qualify. They wouldn't qualify because they would be deemed not credit worthy. So what are we doing? We're taking all these people and saying, we'll even give you 10 more years to pay it back. Not to mention, what we're doing right now through other government programs are these people who aren't making these payments, who could not qualify for a mortgage or qualify for a refinance. We're also giving them free money right now to pay their arrearages, their interest that has now been put in arrearages for up to the last 2 years. Oh, and by the way, it's the same people who haven't made their payments for the past 2 years who are the benefactors of all the home price appreciation over the past 2 years. Haven't made a payment on the house in 2 years? No problem. Apply for money from the federal government. They'll pay all of your arrearages over here for you. They'll keep you out of a payment for the next 6 months, by the way, which is also nice. You get to keep that $250,000 in equity that you didn't earn, which is pretty nice. And oh, by the way, while we're at it, we're going to modify your loan, which means we're still going to drop your interest rate. We'll probably reduce a little of that principal. And then if you want, we'll even amortize this over another 10-year period for you. We're going to do everything possible for you to make this payment when you've done everything possible to not make the payment over the past 2.5 years. Now, is this being crass and cruel? Perhaps a little bit. But since we have to have a one-size-fits-all solution for people who aren't making their payments, and that's what we kind of have to do, we need to err on the side of doing what's best for our communities and being pragmatic about solutions to the problems that stand before us. And what we're seeing right now from HUD is not pragmatism at all. On the contrary, what we're seeing from HUD right now is out of touch. It's very reflective of their centuries or their decades of failure. It really kind of is right now. And this was what was just released. And this, my friends, is nothing more than overpriced talking points for our politicians coming up on the midterm elections. And I got to tell you, it's a real sad day for low and moderate income, families out there who aspire for a reasonable roadmap to owning a house one day. Because rest assured, our government agencies and our elected officials right now are not doing anything to help you. Nothing. Here's my thinking. I have a new action plan I'd like to start. I have a proposal. Here's what I think we should call this one. I don't want our action plan, my friends. I don't want our action plan to be called the Advancing Racial Equity in Support of Underserved Communities Through the Federal Government Act, which I just showed you. Line by line is not going to work at all. I don't want it to be HUD's Equity Action Plan. No, here's my action plan. I think HUD needs to have one right now, and their action plan should be called this. Start from scratch. Maybe then they can find an answer. Who knows? With that said, my good friends, on Good Friday, I bid you a good and farewell and adieu to you. Enjoy your Easter. I'm going to enjoy Easter too. Easter for me is all about chocolate bunnies, man. It's all about chocolate bunnies. Maybe a ham. I'm probably watching a baseball game. Oh, I'm going on a bike ride. I'm going on a bike ride Sunday morning. I got my daughter up from San Diego. I haven't seen her in 6 months, so that's pretty bitchin'. I'm going to get to hang out with my wonderful kid, my wonderful daughter, wonderful kids, wonderful family. I hope you guys all have something fun to do on Thanksgiving. Shit, doesn't really matter these days. I hope you guys have a great Easter. Go eat a chocolate rabbit or two. All right, we'll talk soon, and thanks for jumping on. I appreciate you sticking around late on a Friday. Until